How you doing, my friend?
Pardon the technical difficulties. I'm doing okay. How's it going?
No worries, man. Good to see you again. So I wanted to have you on because Carney came out and was trying to push this. I think it was called a digital services tax or something like that. And then Trump said, okay, no more negotiations. And they wailed and gnashed their teeth. And then all of a sudden came back, well, let's talk again. We'll take that off. So where do things stand, the U.S.-Canadian relationship, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, just to give you a background on the DST, the digital
Yeah.
services tax, what that was for the audience that doesn't know, it was going to affect any American tech company that had a total amount of revenue coming from Canadian customers
Mm-hmm.
at $20 million or above. So that would have been the so-called giants, Uber, Amazon,
Yeah.
Facebook, Meta, AK, these companies. And it would have been retroactive, which is so sinister. It would have gone back all
Wow.
the way to July 2022. Imagine a tax
How about
agency
that?
going that way. Yeah. So it's like, so we have in Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, it's our counterpart to your IRS.
Uh-huh.
And just like, okay, we're going to go back a few years. So it would have been a 3% tax on all revenues obtained from Canadian customers via those companies. And that resembles a lot of what we've seen from the European Union, in
Yes.
which the EU is doing shakedowns on American tech giants
Mm-hmm.
because they're claiming that they seek to prevent a monopolistic or oligopolistic landscape. They're claiming the EU and their subsidiary uh, economic courts that they want to maintain a free market environment in Europe, which is impossible to believe because the European Union is totally communistic in its orientation. They do everything they can to destroy food markets. It's like a 300, 400-pound fat guy talking to you about nutrition, acting to you like, you can't eat that cookie
It's
or
kind of a
something.
weird, like, commie fascist combination, right? And it's because they're doing it in conjunction with state corporate or big corporations they like. I think.
It's
But
it's total extraction. It is. We see piggy bank. We see an ATM in the form of Google or Meta or
Mhm.
any large company, Amazon, and we want to wet our beaks in there. We want to
Yeah,
extract from American innovation. So rather than doing innovation themselves, they launch these so-called antitrust lawsuits. And again, if that's an issue, that's for the American government to determine. The same thing is the case here. The Canadian government sees these American companies as piggy banks to feed off of, and they just try to impose this DST, which has now been, rescinded in name only. It will be legislatively, but as of now, it's just tentative.
so there's been history in Canada, right? I mean, there was the election, and the narrative was that Canadians now hated Trump because of everything he was talking about. What's the reality on the street now that that's settled down?
I don't think that's ever really been the reality. I think the so-called conservative party in this country failed to think outside the box, to operate outside of the parameters set by the system in terms of what the defining issues of the election were. And
Mm-hmm.
it really was about Trump in terms of the way the CBC is like this Canadian government run media monolith, right? So
Yeah,
it's all
yeah,
about Trump, and we got to fight against him. And there was this sort of weak quasi pseudo nationalistic fervor that
yeah.
was attempted to be generated by the machine. Again, the CBC, all these ancillary media outlets, but we've got to have our elbows up against this orange Hitler.
Yeah.
And the so-called conservative party couldn't think outside of that box, couldn't be like, hey, actually, you know what? The election is not about Trump. And insofar as it is, we want to align ourselves with his vision because the things that he's prescribing and applying to the American population is exactly the same remedy and antidote we need in this country. Canada's facing the same things you guys are.
Yeah.
Demographic destruction, annihilation as parasitic government. There's really no difference. So I don't think that the Canadian population is really so anti-Trump. I think they're very disconnected, disaffected, disillusioned, despondent, and unwilling to get activated, especially when the ostensibly oppositional party can't really differentiate itself meaningfully from the status quo.
So I talk about this a lot in Europe, and I'm not excusing the U.S. because we have the same issues, but I see in Europe where they just simply don't have the will to survive. What do you see in Canada? I mean, are you mentioned they don't have the will to activate? I mean, what needs to happen?
I think what needs to happen is you need a sort of Trump-like figure or some sort of, what's that word I'm looking for? Sort of galvanizing individual
Mm-hmm.
around which these disillusioned, disaffected Canadians can coalesce and reclaim, reinvigorate, and pursue our own national identity. So you're talking about the will to live, and I'll add to that, to live for what? What is it to be Canadian? This is obviously an ongoing theme in your show. You and I have discussed this before.
Hmm.
There is a crisis of national identity, and there are many reasons for that. The primary one, of course, is the forced diversification of society via modern immigration policies, where people don't really have the ties that bind in terms of historical commonality anymore. Used to be the
Hmm.
case not that long ago that your neighbor, his grandfather went to war with your grandfather, or
Yeah.
you've known each other for generations and generations. Now you may not know your neighbors because you just moved last week. There's all of this transient life. There's all of this, again, multicultural reality going on. So people don't have that cohesion. So there's got to be, to restore that will to live, to answer your question, some sort of figure around which we can develop some sense of national identity. Of course, it would be some element of civic nationalism because of the racial diversity, the ethnic diversity, the historical lack of commonality around which people could get together and be, okay, this is what it means to be Canadian. Let's have these principles. Let's hold them. Let's cherish them. Let's protect them.
Interesting. And people don't realize, that don't know their history, that Canada was very much supportive militarily of the wars in the 20th century with the Americans. I mean, from D-Day, Vietnam, all of it. What do Canadians think about, and what is the status of the Canadian military in your opinion?
I have only a very superficial understanding of it. I have been fortunate enough to meet some guys over the years, just given my travels, who are pretty
Yeah.
elite in the military, some former, some still active. And a regular topic of discussion from them, among them, would be degradation in military standards.
Hmm.
So they don't think the Canadian military is as prepared to do what it needs to do for many reasons, one of which is this, I'll call it left-wing politicization of the military, in which there's this deprioritization over just being good at what you're supposed to do. To borrow from the late Rush Limbaugh, a great military kills people and breaks things. It's
Yes,
really that
exactly.
simple. Can you do
Yeah.
that or not? It's not
Yeah.
about have I checked the box of a black guy and a Puerto Rican guy and a so-called homosexual guy. It's not about that. It's about
Yeah.
whether or not you're effective at your job. So that priority is being degraded in pursuit of these sort of ghost hunts of diversity and so-called inclusion.
Hmm.
Lastly, we talked about this last time I was with you. The Canadian government for decades has been freeloading off of the US taxpayer in terms of these implicit security guarantees provided by the US military. So, since we share geography, the Canadian government, all forms of them, again, for decades, have been like, you know what, we cannot invest in our national defense for the purposes of protecting our sovereignty because Big Brother US will take care of it if things ever get crazy. So that allows for the Canadian government to continually allow the military to atrophy, to decay technologically.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Okay, in terms of recruitment, because we've just got this sense of faith, maybe it's misplaced, that Big Brother America will bail us out if things get hairy.
Wow. What about Alberta? A lot of smoke there, a lot of we're going to secede kind of talk. That's where all the economic engine is in Canada, right? Or at least a lot of it, not all of it,
Huge
but a
amount.
lot of it. What do you see happening there?
Well, I haven't paid close attention, so it's still to be determined. There obviously is a growing desire for, let's call it the Albertan separatist movement, to get going, because
Mhm.
all the problems that they air in terms of their desires to be an independent state from Canada writ large, they're worsening. It's not
Mhm.
like all of their grievances have gotten better. They've all gotten worse. They're getting taxed more heavily. They're getting governed more heavily in terms of their freedom to do things. Those things that are not exactly economic, but how you can move, how you can't, where you can leave, these regulatory things. Immigration obviously is run by the federal government. So demographic destruction will affect Alberta because of what's happening in Ottawa. So these sorts of problems that the Albertan separatist movement, sovereignty movement, whatever you want to call it, are not getting any better. So they're going to get more aggressive. Will it have success? I don't know.
Huh. What else do people need to know?
I made a couple of notes here just so people could keep get some sense. Those in the U.S. Some things I want to share with your audience is that, the Canadian government sought to do this DST, digital services tax on these U.S. giants, because it thought this would be some sort of easy way to steal some U.S. dollars,
Yeah.
And we always hear about government spending as a share of GDP. Now, the official numbers as far as the federal government spending as a share of Canadian GDP is something like 20%, which of course is way, way low. That's not the reality of it. And I want Americans to understand, because this applies to how you're deceived by your institutions as well. So when you see the government say U.S. government spending composes X percent of U.S. GDP, understand that that percentage does not include all of these forced costs that the government puts on you that aren't captured as government spending. For example, if the government says you must use this sort of product in the construction of homes, that's not captured as a tax. But yet every home in America might have to do that, right? So think of all the things the federal government regulates, all the things the federal government mandates upon employers and employees and businesses and homeowners to do this, that, and the other. That is an unthinkable amount of money. And that doesn't get captured as government spending. So in this country, when you actually include that, I checked some think tanks in this country that are, let's say, conservative, at least in terms of fiscal and economic policy. Government spending as a share of GDP in this country, in Canada, is 64%.
Holy cow.
That means 64 cents out of every dollar circulating in this economy is basically government mandate. And I'm bringing that up because at 64%, and that's just the federal government, that is not municipal governments, that is not provincial or territorial governments. That's not enough for them. That does not satisfy them. They still want billions of dollars from Meta and Amazon. Again, the point is they're insatiable. And I just want the audience to understand that this government, there's no amount of money they can take that will ever satisfy them. It's always more cowbell. They need more of it and more of it.
Well, we're in Atlas Shrugged territory now. I mean, right? I mean, the Department of Government Efficiency, or whatever they called it in the book. I mean, it's amazing.
One more thing I want you folks to know about, we talk about national identity and nationalism and so forth. And this is one thing that's very sad. There are like sort of two competing nationalisms in this country. I'll say one is left-wing and fake, and one is more conservative and grounded in Canadian history and reality. So the fake left-wing nationalism in this country, which got sort of rejuvenated to some degree via the election by making it about, Trump. It's all about who's going to go harder on Trump. So very sadly, the left-wing Canadian vision of national identity is very much about what it opposes, and that is America. It's about what we're not. So if you talk to one of these like left-wing bots, these sort of non-thinking NPC types, they define Canadian identity on universal healthcare. Oh, we've got free healthcare. That's what makes us Canadians. Which, I mean, there's so much to unpack right there. Nothing's free. It's a disaster. Sure. It's getting worse. But it's all about how we're not American. And there's a currency, a political currency that relates to what I'll call anti-Americanism, for lack of a better term, that the left-wing politicians use to sort of galvanize support for themselves. Like, who can be more disdainful towards our unruly neighbors to the south, the less sophisticated, more freedom-minded, gun-toting freaks to the south. And that's the fake, hollow Canadian nationalism of the left, which is all about what it opposes as opposed to what it actually stands for.
Fascinating. How do people follow you? What are you up to these days, Robert?
Check me out on X, Kraychik, things to come. Stay tuned.
Excellent. All right, man. We'll have you back. Take care.
Cheers, brother.